There are some things you just do not expect to see when you step outside to feed the chickens. One moment you are tossing seed into the yard. The next you are dodging a buzzing mechanical wasp the size of a dinner plate swooping inches from your face. The hens exploded in every direction like someone had set off a firecracker under them. My hat went flying. My dog, an old blue heeler named Scout, barked and snapped at the thing, chasing it across the yard. It was funny, dramatic, and just plain ridiculous all at once, but deep down I knew exactly what it was. Not a lost drone, not a kid's toy. No, this was a deliberate invasion, and whoever was controlling that drone was about to have a very bad day. It had been a long time since I needed to think like a soldier. My farm, a stretch of old family land tucked outside the city limits, was my sanctuary. I had traded battlefields for cornfields, surveillance screens for sunsets. Out here, the loudest thing you usually heard was the tractor engine or a rooster crowing at dawn. Privacy was sacred. That is why, when the drone zipped back around and tried to peer through my barn windows, something inside me switched back on. Training buried deep under years of civilian peace rose like a tidal wave. I stood still, breathing slow, analyzing. Who? By what? Were they looking for? And more importantly, how could I end it without firing a single shot? Karen. Her name hit my mind like a slap. Karen Marsh, president of our HOA, self-proclaimed guardian of property values and moral behavior. She had been a thorn in my side since the day I moved in. She hated the animals, hated the crops, hated the barn, said it was an eyesore, complained at every meeting that my tractor was an environmental hazard. She had once tried to fine me for putting up a handmade mailbox. I had laughed her out of my driveway that day. Clearly, she had decided spying was her next step. The drone, a shiny black model with a tiny red camera blinking underneath, hovered over my porch now. It was so close I could see the manufacturer's logo. Expensive toy. Someone had money to burn. Scout kept barking but stayed wisely at my side, ears pinned back. I made no sudden moves. Let her think I was clueless. Let her get confident. Let her make the first big mistake. Because what Karen Marsh did not know was that before I ever picked up a shovel or planted a seed, I had spent 12 years piloting drones for the United States military. Recon missions, covert surveillance, air support. I had seen every dirty trick in the book. I had invented a few of them myself. Pretending to be just another flustered farmer, I backed toward the barn, waving my arms like I was chasing a fly. I ducked inside and slammed the doors behind me. In the cool dark of the barn, I leaned against the wooden wall and closed my eyes for a moment. Assess, plan, execute. That was the order, always had been. I climbed the ladder up to the loft and peered through a loose plank. The drone was still hovering, its camera lens sweeping the property like a tiny black eye. Good? Stay curious, Karen. Stay nosy. I am going to teach you a lesson you will not forget. Instead of grabbing my shotgun, which would have been my grandpa's solution, I took a different approach. I slipped through the barn's back door and sprinted low across the field toward the old tool shed. Inside, hidden behind rusty rakes and broken lawnmowers, was my secret weapon. Not a gun, not a net. Something better. An ancient laptop, military grade, hardened against dust and rain, with software programs most civilians had never even heard of. I yanked it out, slapped the dust off, and fired it up. While the drone continued circling like a lazy vulture, I tapped in a few commands. The laptop's signal boosters groaned to life. I grinned. If that drone came within 30 feet of my receiver, it would be mine to control. A ghost in her machine, a pirate at her wheel. But first, I needed bait. Something so juicy, so suspicious, Karen would not be able to resist. Thinking fast, I grabbed a few cans of fluorescent paint from the shed, the kind we use for marking tree lines. I sprayed a huge bright circle in the middle of the empty field, then planted a fake warning sign right next to it. Research project in progress. Keep out. Authorized personnel only. Big block letters. Impossible to miss. It looked official enough to spark her HOA paranoia, but weird enough to seem secret. Sure enough, within minutes, the drone swooped lower, closer, its camera zooming in. I could almost feel Karen's nose twitching from 2 streets away. I activated the capture program on the laptop and watched the signal strength climb. Closer, closer. The drone drifted right into the net zone. With a final keystroke, I hijacked the drone's controls. Its little motors kicked once, then it hovered, confused, prisoner to my will. Scout barked excitedly as I walked calmly across the field to meet my new toy. I held out one hand, and the drone obediently floated down into my grasp. I plucked it from the air like picking an apple off a tree. The tiny camera blinked helplessly. I could imagine Karen's face, staring at her controller, realizing she had lost connection. Back inside the barn, I sat on a hay bale, turning the drone over in my hand. Expensive model, GPS enabled, real-time streaming, and judging from the stickers on the underside, definitely Karen's property. I could have smashed it to pieces right there, but that would have been too easy too quick. No, I had a better idea. Grinning like a kid at Christmas, I pulled out the laptop again and got to work. This battle was not over. It had just begun, and Karen Marsh was about to find out what happens when you poke a sleeping giant who used to command drones over enemy territory for a living. Out here, she thought she could control the skies. She was dead wrong. And tomorrow she was going to learn just how wrong she really was. The next morning I was up before the sun, my boots crunching over the frosted grass as I moved with purpose toward the tool shed. I had barely slept, my mind buzzing with plans. Today was not about anger. It was about precision, calm, quiet, calculated steps. I sipped my coffee and watched the horizon turn from deep purple to the soft gold of dawn. Somewhere out there, Karen was probably pacing her living room, clutching her fancy drone controller, trying to figure out why her precious surveillance bird had vanished into thin air. I could almost hear her ranting. Knowing her, she would not let it go. She would escalate. That was her pattern. She always pushed further when she thought she was losing control. I needed to know exactly how far she would go. That meant returning the drone without her suspecting that I had tampered with it, but not without leaving a tiny gift hidden inside. Something she would not notice at first. Something that would help me see everything she did from now on. It was not hard. The drone's onboard memory was already packed with footage from my farm. With a few quick commands, I added a silent background program that transmitted her controller's GPS coordinates back to my laptop whenever it was active. Karen had turned herself into a walking signal. Every time she powered up that drone, I would know exactly where she was standing and exactly where the drone was looking. Satisfied with my work, I bundled the drone gently in an old feed sack and set out across the field. I took the long way around, sticking to the tree line, staying out of sight. The town regulations might protect her right to fly a drone, but the HOA rules were another matter entirely. Technically, operating drones over other members' property without permission was a violation, especially if it caused disturbances. Not that Karen had ever cared about rules applying to her. I crouched at the edge of her property line, peering through the dense shrubs. Her backyard was a shrine to suburban excess. White vinyl fencing, perfectly trimmed hedges, a stone fountain shaped like an angel vomiting water into a koi pond. And there, near the back porch, was her command center, a folding table piled high with gadgets, including a duplicate drone controller and a laptop of her own. She was alone, talking to herself, waving her arms in frustration. I slipped the drone over the fence, aiming for a soft patch of grass. It landed silently. I smiled and slipped away just as Scout gave a soft warning growl from behind a tree. We retreated into the woods before Karen ever knew we were there. Back at the farm, I waited. It did not take long. Within the hour, I picked up the signal. Her drone was back in the air. I fired up the laptop and watched as the GPS data poured in. She was not just flying over my land anymore. She was flying over 2 other properties too, zooming in on gardens, porches, even people relaxing on their deck. She circled Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning rose bushes like a hawk stalking prey. She hovered over the Miller kids' trampoline while they played. My stomach twisted in disgust. This was not harmless curiosity. This was full-blown obsession. I watched the data streams and mapped out her patterns. She flew higher when she crossed the street but dipped low when she thought no one was looking. She spent longer over properties that had animals or visible sheds. She was gathering information for something, though what exactly I could not yet tell. She even flew back over my own barn, hovering almost lovingly over the fake warning sign I had painted yesterday. Good. Keep looking. Keep digging your own hole. By late afternoon, Karen had landed her drone again. I decided it was time to move to the next phase, direct observation, but not the clumsy kind she practiced. No, my style was quieter, invisible. I drove the old pickup truck into town under the excuse of needing supplies and parked a block from her house. Then I set up in the park across the street, pretending to read a newspaper while keeping one eye on her front door. Scout lay under the bench at my feet, panting quietly. After about an hour, I saw her leave, not dressed for a casual stroll either. She was wearing a business suit, carrying a thick binder tucked under one arm, and clutching her phone tight in the other. She got into her shiny SUV and peeled out of the driveway like she was late for something important. I waited until she was gone, then casually made my way closer. Her house looked empty. Perfect. I already knew she had cameras pointing outward, mainly toward the street and the front lawn. She had probably installed them to catch kids riding bikes too fast or neighbors parking an inch too close to her curb. But I also knew she had a blind spot in her backyard. She trusted her 6-foot fence and never thought anyone would come through the woods. I slipped around the side of the house, through the trees, and into her backyard, moving quickly. I snapped a few photos with my phone. The drone set up. The binder left open on the patio table. I zoomed in and caught a glimpse of paperwork titled HOA Special Investigations Committee. She was compiling dossiers on neighbors, photos, notes, diagrams. I even recognized a picture of my own front porch. This was no longer just petty spying. This was something deeper, something that could ruin people's lives. I backed away, heart pounding. I had seen enough. Karen was not just violating my privacy. She was building a case, a false one. She wanted to force people to sell or sue them into submission or worse. I returned to the farm at sunset, feeling the weight of the day settle on my shoulders. This was bigger than a simple drone nuisance. This was war, quiet war, one fought with cameras, papers, gossip, and legal loopholes. Karen had declared it without ever firing a shot, but she had made a mistake. She had picked the wrong opponent. As I fed the animals and locked up for the night, I thought through my next move. Direct confrontation would not work. She would deny everything, play the victim, twist the story until people doubted what they saw. No, I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that showed not just her spying but her intent to harm. It had to be clean, public, and it had to hit her where it hurt the most. Tomorrow I would set the final trap, and when it snapped shut, there would be no escape. Karen Marsh thought she was clever, flying a drone into my airspace. She had no idea I had already flown straight into her mind and found all the cracks. The next morning, the farm was unusually still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I moved through my chores with automatic motions, loading hay, checking water troughs, fixing a loose hinge on the barn door. But my mind was not on any of it. Every move I made was calculated, part of the bigger plan that was already in motion. Today was not about reacting. It was about taking control of the entire board, while Karen still thought she was winning. The laptop sat open on the kitchen table, monitoring the drone's activity. As expected, just before noon, the signal flared up. Karen was flying again. Instead of rushing out to confront it, I let the drone do what it came to do. It hovered over the fake restricted zone, swooping low, trying to catch something, anything that would justify her obsession. From my chair on the porch, I watched it silently, a small grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. She was so predictable. She could not resist the bait. I let her gather all the false evidence she wanted because soon she would walk right into the real trap, and there would be no wriggling free. While the drone buzzed overhead, I set up the second part of my plan inside the barn where Karen's drone had once been trapped in the hidden net. This time there would be no nets, no physical traps. Only the illusion of something forbidden, something she could not ignore. I dragged out a few large metal shipping crates that I had salvaged years ago from a military surplus auction. They were old, dented, and covered in faded stenciled labels that read "Classified Equipment" and "Military Use Only." I stacked them just inside the barn entrance, tilted the doors slightly open, and placed a few random pieces of wiring and machinery inside, just enough to look convincing from a distance. Then, for the finishing touch, I propped up a clipboard on top of one of the crates, filled with fake schematics. Not just any schematics, but ones that hinted at something suspicious. High-frequency transmission devices, relay towers, surveillance nodes. It was pure nonsense, but dressed up enough to make any amateur spy think they had hit gold. I angled everything perfectly so the drone's camera could catch a glimpse if it hovered just right. By the time I finished setting the scene, the drone was already creeping closer. Curious, emboldened, hungry for secrets. Back inside the house, I triggered the next phase. Using the laptop, I sent a subtle override signal, one that would cause Karen's drone to experience a minor systems glitch. Nothing major, just a forced landing warning that would make it automatically descend and land within a designated area, right in front of the barn, right in front of the bait. Sure enough, a few minutes later I heard the familiar whining buzz dip lower and lower until it disappeared behind the barn wall. I sipped my coffee patiently and waited. About 10 minutes later, I saw a flash of movement through the trees. Karen herself, huffing and puffing in a tracksuit, power walking toward my property line, trying to look casual but failing miserably. She had parked her SUV 2 streets over, probably thinking no one would notice her cutting through the woods like a fox after a chicken. She paused at the edge of the field, scanning the barn with sharp, suspicious eyes. Then she made her move, darting low across the open ground like a kid sneaking into a neighbor's pool. I stayed hidden inside the farmhouse, peering through a slit in the curtains, heart thumping in quiet excitement. This was it. She was about to incriminate herself completely. Karen slipped into the barn, ducking through the half-open doors, her head whipping back and forth. She spotted the shipping crates almost immediately and made a beeline for them. She leaned in, poking around, snapping photos with her phone. She even rifled through the fake schematics, her hands trembling with greed. Every second of it was being recorded. Multiple hidden cameras I had installed last night captured every angle, time-stamped and geolocated with crystal clarity. Then came the final cherry on top. I had rigged a small speaker hidden near the roof beams to play a pre-recorded sound loop. Military radio chatter. Low, murmured voices mentioning imaginary operations, deployment schedules, and secure frequencies. The moment the sounds kicked in, Karen froze, dropping the clipboard in panic. She whirled around, wide-eyed, and bolted from the barn like a deer under gunfire, clutching her phone to her chest. I waited until she disappeared into the woods, then casually strolled down to the barn, collected the drone, and powered down the speaker. Operation Bait and Record was a complete success. I spent the next hour pulling the video files from the hidden cameras, reviewing them frame by frame, every single act of trespassing, every unauthorized photograph. Every moment of Karen violating private property was captured in perfect high definition, and because she had entered under false pretenses based on a fake emergency landing, she could not claim ignorance. She had willfully invaded private land to gather what she thought was evidence. With everything neatly packaged on a thumb drive, I made a few backup copies and tucked them into a secure folder. But I was not finished yet. Karen needed to understand not just that she had lost, but that she had made herself the villain in her own story. To do that, I needed an audience. A big one. Not just the sheriff. Not just the HOA board. I needed everyone who had ever been harassed by Karen to see exactly who she was when she thought no one was watching. The perfect opportunity presented itself almost immediately. A flyer was slipped into my mailbox advertising the annual FOA block party, scheduled for the upcoming Saturday. Mandatory attendance for all residents. Encouraged to bring family, friends, and any local officials interested in community relations. Perfect. Public setting. Neutral ground. Lots of witnesses. All I needed to do was prepare my evidence package and wait for the right moment. That night, as the crickets sang outside and the stars spun lazily overhead, I sat at the kitchen table assembling my final payload. A short, edited video clip showing Karen's drone spying, showing her sneaking into my barn, showing her photographing supposed classified materials. No voiceover, no editorializing, just raw, undeniable fact. I timed it carefully, trimming the footage so it told a simple, clean story in under 2 minutes. Short enough to hold attention, damning enough to destroy her credibility completely. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. This was not revenge. This was justice. Karen had spent months using fear, intimidation, and deceit to bully her neighbors into submission. She had weaponized the HOA, turning it into her personal fiefdom. And now she was about to find out what happened when you crossed someone who knew how to fight wars without firing a single shot. The farm was silent, the fields bathed in silver moonlight. Scout lay at my feet, snoring softly. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Karen's little empire would crumble. And the best part was, she would have no one to blame but herself. The morning of the HOA block party arrived hot and sticky, the kind of heavy summer day where even the shade felt warm. I spent the early hours checking on the animals, making sure everything was secure before heading back to the house to get ready. I kept my outfit simple: faded jeans, a clean shirt, work boots, nothing fancy. I wanted to blend in, to be just another quiet farmer in the crowd. I slipped the small thumb drive into my pocket, tapping it lightly for reassurance. Everything I needed to expose Karen was right there, compressed into 2 minutes of undeniable truth. The town green, where the block party was set up, buzzed with early arrivals. Families unloaded picnic baskets. Kids darted between tables decorated with checkered cloths. Balloons bobbed in the breeze. A stage had been set up near the center, with a portable screen for the community announcements. I spotted Karen almost immediately. She was hard to miss in a bright pink dress, heels sinking into the soft grass, waving and smiling as if she were running for office. Her eyes scanned the crowd like a hawk hunting prey. No doubt she was looking for me. I stayed near the edges, weaving through the small talk and laughter, nodding politely when spoken to, but keeping my real focus locked on the stage. Around noon, the event coordinator, a cheerful woman named Janet, called everyone's attention to the center stage. She tapped the microphone a few times, sending sharp pops through the speakers. "Thank you all for coming," Janet chirped. "Before we get to the food and games, we have a few quick community announcements and a very special presentation prepared by one of our residents." She beamed as if announcing a surprise guest star. My heart pounded once, then settled into a steady rhythm. Karen was standing near the front row, arms folded, an expectant smirk on her face. She probably thought she was about to be honored for her tireless service to the HOA. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I made my way casually toward the stage, handing the event coordinator my thumb drive with a polite smile. "Just a short video," I said, "something I thought the community might appreciate." Janet seemed delighted. Without questioning, she plugged it into the laptop connected to the projector. The screen lit up. Karen straightened her shoulders, tossing her hair as if preparing for her moment of glory. I stepped back, blending into the crowd, my arms folded loosely across my chest. The video began to play. At first, there was only the soft buzz of drone footage. A bird's-eye view of the neighborhood. People murmured curiously. Then the angle shifted, swooping low over private yards, peeking into windows, hovering inches above gardens. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone muttered, "Hey, that's my backyard." Karen's smile faltered slightly. The footage continued, showing Karen's drone lingering over the Miller kids bouncing on their trampoline, zooming in on Mrs. Henderson, tending her roses, even hovering over backyard barbecues. Discomfort spread through the audience like a slow fog. Then came the climax, the moment Karen crept into my barn, caught red-handed, snapping pictures of the fake classified equipment, rifling through personal property, trespassing without a second thought. The radio chatter played faintly in the background, heightening the tension. When the final frame froze on Karen's face peering greedily into the camera, a stunned silence fell over the entire green. For a heartbeat, no one moved, Then the whispers began. Low, urgent, confused. Parents hugged their children closer. Elderly neighbors shook their heads in disgust. Karen's face turned a blotchy red, sweat beading on her forehead. She opened her mouth, probably to deny it, but no words came out. The event coordinator blinked at the screen, then slowly turned to look at Karen, her expression a mixture of shock and dawning horror. Karen Marsh, Janet said, her voice shaking slightly, would you care to explain this footage to the community? The microphone hung between them like a loaded gun. Karen stammered something about protecting property values, about maintaining neighborhood standards, but it was too late. The damage was done. The proof was undeniable. Several neighbors stepped forward, shouting questions, demanding answers. Why were you filming my kids? Why were you trespassing? Who gave you the right? The crowd pressed in, anger rising like a storm. I stayed near the back, arms crossed, saying nothing. There was no need to. Karen was unraveling all by herself, tangled in her own lies. She tried to deflect blame, pointing fingers at imaginary threats, at supposed illegal activity on private properties, but no one was buying it. Even her few remaining supporters drifted away, unwilling to be associated with the sinking ship. Then the HOA president, a stern retired judge named Mr. Whitmore, stepped onto the stage, his face grim. In light of this new evidence, he announced, we are hereby suspending Karen Marsh from all HOA activities pending a full investigation. Furthermore, any resident who feels their privacy has been violated is encouraged to file formal complaints with law enforcement. Murmurs of approval swept through the crowd. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She turned desperate eyes toward the audience, but found no sympathy. Parents shielded their children from her gaze. Elderly couples shook their heads and walked away. Friends she had once bragged about abandoned her one by one until she stood alone on the stage, clutching her purse like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. Finally realizing the battle was lost, Karen stumbled off the stage, pushing through the crowd without another word. Someone's elbow clipped her shoulder, but no one apologized. She scrambled to her SUV, gunned the engine, and sped away, tires kicking up a spray of gravel and dust. A quiet cheer broke out behind her, followed by relieved laughter. I stayed for a while, chatting with neighbors, accepting handshakes and claps on the back, but keeping my words few. Let them draw their own conclusions. I was not interested in being a hero. I had simply defended my home and my community the way I had always been trained to do, with precision and patience and an iron will. As the sun dipped low and the party wound down, I finally headed back to the farm, Scout trotting happily at my heels. The fields glowed golden in the twilight, peaceful once more. I leaned on the porch rail, breathing in the clean, warm air, listening to the soft hum of cicadas. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly at ease. Karen might still try to make noise. She might try to claw her way back. But it would not matter. Her power was broken, her influence shattered by her own hand. The community had seen her true face, and there was no hiding it now. The days following the block party were some of the quietest I had experienced since moving onto the farm. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off the entire community. People who used to glance nervously over their shoulders now smiled freely and waved when they passed by. Children played in their yards without the hum of a drone shadowing them. Couples walked their dogs without worrying about someone snapping pictures from behind a bush. Even the HOA meetings, which had once felt like battlegrounds of petty complaints and accusations, turned into civil discussions about real community improvement. The transformation was immediate and profound. Karen had not been seen since that humiliating afternoon when she fled the green, her reputation in ruins. Her house sat dark most nights, shades drawn tight, her once perfectly manicured lawn growing wild and patchy. It was clear she was either hiding or planning her next move, but it hardly mattered anymore. The community had turned its back on her, and there was no coming back from that. One evening, about a week after the party, I sat on the porch with Scout at my feet, sipping a cold drink and enjoying the sunset, when I noticed a car creeping down the dirt road toward my property. It was not Karen's flashy SUV, but a smaller, nondescript sedan. I watched it slow to a stop at the edge of my driveway, the engine idling for a moment before the driver's door opened. Out stepped Mr. Whitmore, the HOA president. He walked up the drive with a slow, deliberate pace, his hat in his hands, looking every bit the stern judge he had once been. I stood to greet him, curious. "Mind if I sit a moment?" he asked, nodding toward the empty rocking chair beside mine. "Of course," I said, pulling it out for him. He settled into the chair with a long sigh, staring out across the fields as if gathering his thoughts. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said after a while. "What you did at the block party, you saved this community from a lot more trouble than you know." I shrugged, not out of false modesty, but because it was simply the truth. "I only showed people what was already happening," I said. "They made their own choices." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Maybe so, but it takes courage to stand up when others stay silent." He paused, then turned to face me more directly. "We're reviewing the HOA leadership structure," he said, "considering some reforms. Would you be willing to serve on the advisory committee, help us draft new policies, make sure something like this never happens again?" I leaned back, thinking it over. I had left behind a life of command and authority for a reason. Out here, I valued my independence, my peace. But I also understood the importance of protecting that peace. If keeping an eye on things meant preventing another Karen from rising, then maybe it was worth it. "I'll think about it," I said honestly. He nodded as if he had expected that answer and stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "Take your time," he said, "and thank you again." He walked back to his car, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Night fell slowly, painting the sky in deep blues and purples. The stars blinked awake one by one, ancient sentinels watching over the land. Scout lifted his head, ears perked as a soft breeze carried the scent of distant rain. I scratched behind his ears, feeling a rare sense of complete contentment. The farm was safe. The community was healing. And for once, there were no battles left to fight. Or so I thought. The next morning, as I checked the fences along the northern pasture, I spotted something unusual tucked into the tall grass near the property line. A small black object, half buried in the dirt, glinting in the early light. My heart tightened, instinct warning me even before I bent to pick it up. It was a drone. Not Karen's original one, but a different model. Smaller, sleeker, newer. And it was broken, as if it had crashed from a great height. The casing was cracked, wires dangling from the undercarriage. I carried it back to the tool shed, setting it carefully on the workbench. Pulling out my laptop, I hooked it up and began sifting through the corrupted files. What I found made my blood run cold. Dozens of video clips recorded over several nights showing various properties in the neighborhood. Footage of backyards, bedrooms through open windows, even private family moments captured without consent. Whoever had been flying this drone was not just snooping. They were stalking, systematically documenting the lives of my neighbors in intimate, disturbing detail. And based on the timestamps, some of the footage had been taken after Karen's fall from grace. This was not Karen's work. It was someone else. Someone worse. I sat back, staring at the screen, the weight of realization settling heavily on my chest. The war I thought I had ended was not over. Karen had been the symptom, not the disease. Her downfall had created a power vacuum, and someone far more dangerous had stepped into the shadows. Someone who had learned from her mistakes and was operating with even more secrecy. For a long time, I sat there in the shed, the broken drone buzzing softly from its damaged circuits. Then slowly, deliberately, I closed the laptop and locked the shed door behind me. It was clear I would have to act again, but not out of anger or revenge, out of duty, out of the unshakable belief that some things were worth protecting, no matter the cost. Scout trotted beside me as I crossed the fields back toward the house, the sun rising bright and merciless over the horizon. I had traded war zones for wheat fields, battlefields for barns, but some battles came looking for you whether you wanted them or not. And when they did, you had a choice: stand and fight or turn away. The days that followed felt different, heavier. I moved through my chores, keeping the same steady routine, but a new alertness had settled into my bones. Every gust of wind, Every rustle in the trees, every far-off engine sounded sharper, more suspicious. I knew better than to let paranoia take hold, but instincts honed from years of battlefield work whispered that I was being watched. Not by Karen anymore. She had been reckless, sloppy, easy to bait. This new threat was colder, more calculating, and far better at hiding their tracks. They had learned from her mistakes and were determined not to repeat them. The broken drone in my shed served as a constant reminder that while the community celebrated their newfound peace, a darker game was unfolding just beyond the edges of their awareness. I spent the first 2 nights after finding the drone reinforcing my property, not with fences or weapons, but with eyes. I installed discrete motion detectors along the tree lines, placed small hidden cameras high up in the barns, and even set up noise-activated recorders along the back field. None of it was obvious to a casual observer. That was the point. Let them think the farm was wide open. Let them get bold. I wanted them to make a mistake. I wanted them to reveal themselves. And when they did, I would be ready. Scout picked up on the change too. Normally lazy and content to nap in the sun, he now stayed close to my side, moving silently at night with his ears perked and nose twitching at unseen scents. His instincts were sharper than any technology. I trusted him completely. On the 3rd night, the first clue came at exactly 2:30 in the morning. One of the recorders near the north pasture crackled to life, capturing a soft, metallic whirring sound followed by a faint thud. By the time I reached the spot, flashlight in hand, there was nothing visible except a few disturbed patches of grass. But the recorder had done its job. Someone was probing my defenses. The 4th night brought another encounter, this one even closer. As I made my rounds just before midnight, Scout stiffened and gave a low warning growl. I killed my lantern and crouched low, straining my ears. There, in the distance, barely visible against the dark sky, was the faint blinking light of a drone hovering silently over the south field. It was not flying like a hobbyist's toy, bobbing and weaving. It was methodical, moving in slow, precise grids as if mapping the terrain. I watched it for a long time, heart pounding quietly in my chest. Whoever was behind this was serious and disciplined. I could have tried to jam the signal or bring it down right then, but I held back. I needed more. One rogue drone could be explained away. A pattern could not. So I waited, tracked, recorded. For 3 more nights, the drone returned, each time mapping a different section of the farm. Each time it stayed a little longer, grew a little bolder. I began piecing together its flight paths, laying them over maps of the property. A pattern emerged. It was not interested in the fields or the livestock. It was focused entirely on the structures, the barns, the sheds, the farmhouse itself. It was planning something. Finally, after a week of quiet stalking, I decided it was time to act. The next night I set a new trap. Not with nets or capture programs. That would be too obvious. Instead, I rigged a section of the barn roof with a series of infrared lights, invisible to the naked eye but blindingly bright to the sensitive cameras typically used in high-end drones. At the same time, I planted a few deliberate decoys around the property. Strange-looking equipment, fake transmitters, all carefully staged to bait the operator into lowering their guard. I wanted them to think they had found what they were looking for. I wanted them to commit. As expected, the drone arrived just after 2:00 in the morning. It swooped low, drawn to the fake transmitters like a moth to a flame. The moment it crossed into the infrared field, its camera feed would have been overwhelmed with blinding white noise, rendering it useless for detailed surveillance. I stayed hidden, watching from the shadows, heart hammering in my chest. After a few minutes of confused circling, the drone began to drift back north toward the woods where I guessed the operator was hiding. I gave it a head start, then slipped silently through the trees, tracking it by sound. Scout moved beside me, barely making a whisper. We crossed the fields, cut through a stand of old pines, and emerged near the narrow creek that marked the boundary of the property. There, crouched among the bushes, was a figure dressed all in black, hunched over a handheld controller, eyes glued to the dim screen. They were so focused on the drone feed they never heard me approach. I stepped out of the shadows and spoke calmly but firmly. "You are trespassing." The figure jerked in surprise, dropping the controller, which cracked against a rock. They scrambled to their feet, ready to run, but Scout growled low and deep, freezing them in place. "Hands up," I said, not unkindly, but with the authority of someone who would not hesitate to act if necessary. Slowly, the figure raised their hands. Up close, I saw it was not some hardened professional but a kid, barely out of his teens, pale and shaking. I kept my voice calm, measured. "Who sent you?" He stammered something about being paid cash to gather footage. No names, no details. Typical. I called the sheriff right then and there, keeping the boy in sight until the deputies arrived 20 minutes later. They took him into custody, along with the shattered drone and his recording equipment. I gave my statement briefly, sticking to the facts. The deputies promised to dig deeper, to find whoever was behind it. I had a strong suspicion, but without proof, it was better to let the law handle it. As dawn broke over the farm, bathing the fields in soft gold, I stood on the porch watching the patrol car disappear down the dirt road. Scout sat at my side, his head resting against my knee. We had won another battle, but I knew better than to believe the war was truly over. There would always be threats, always be those who mistook kindness for weakness, but they would learn in time that some lines were not meant to be crossed. I breathed deep of the morning air, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders once more. This farm was not just my home. It was my stand, my promise to protect something pure and honest in a world too often consumed by greed and fear. Whatever came next, I would be ready.